Hi, Art10. We're going to go ahead and continue with texture. So, as promised, I have this presentation for you. When we started off this semester with the elements of art, we started looking at line. We went into an experiment with shape, forms, space, and we're in our last month. So, like, we're going to be looking at texture and color. That's the last two. So, over the next week, we will be working with texture. So, I have a short exercise on that. When we're thinking about texture, we're kind of thinking of two different concepts. So we have sort of actual tactile texture, and then we have implied texture, right? So describing or thinking about what tactile texture is, it's the surface quality that can be seen and felt. So it's using our senses, right? Um, touch and sight. So textures can be rough or smooth, soft or hard. They don't always feel like they look. So and when we're thinking about implied texture, that's the simulation of texture. So that's fooling the eye or trompe l'oeil, right? So where for example, a drawing of a porcupine may look prickly, but if you touch the drawing, the paper is still smooth. Right, so Merriam-Webster's definition of texture, and that's how you might how we pronounce it in the U.S. So texture, yeah, texture. That sounds good. So the visual or tactile surface characteristics and appearance of something. That something could be whatever you're drawing. So when we're looking at the two types of texture, this is the terms that we're going to be using: physical texture, tactile, and implied texture or rendered. So when we think of physical texture, these are all examples of physical texture. So I mean, this is like a lovely piece of wood. We're seeing the wood grain going in there. There's movement with this texture and how it's photographed, but it has this sort of like nice little grit that's in there. When we're thinking about other textures, like how can we tell that this is a rough stone? Was this something that was just chiseled? Is this sandstone? Is this a side chunk of a marble that was carved out of a mountain, right? So it has this sort of like it's rough yet also kind of soft at the same time. But then when we look at say feathers, right, that has a lot of texture in it from the contrast of the actual little individual pieces of keratin, right? But then it also has pigment. So it's interesting because like it's not only just soft, but it visually has some softness that happens in the visual effects of the texture. Um, Thinking about mushrooms, right? The little frills of the mushrooms and how it curls over, so you can see the contrast of the top portion of that skin on this. I think this is an oyster mushroom, and then you see all the little like frills on the bottom. Other textures, like some of you are maybe you're going to take a glass blowing class in your future, or maybe you're taking ceramics. Ceramic is essentially like when you put a finishing glaze on that, you're essentially like you're making glass, right? So silica is one of the main components in ceramics. And other things that might happen in the transformation of a texture. So what we're looking at is sort of the raw material of tiger's eye. So if any of you like go into jewelry or you collect jewelry, you might have noticed like, oh, I was always fascinated with tiger's eye. It has a really cool like transition of texture. And when you take this stone and you polish it, it transforms that texture, and it has appearances that you would get out of wood and stone, and at a close-up some of these look like a galaxy, right? Other things that we take for granted is, our limitation of our sight. So when we look at things at a macro level, which means like really up close, you start to get a different, I guess, a different experience with the texture. So this is a good example of it looks like a design, but this is a macro photo of fish scales. It looks almost like stacked wood or stacked stone against each other. But yeah, that's fish scales. And then what happens with fur, right? Fur, you start looking up close. Oh my God, it's not just one color, right? There's little specks of black in there. There's little specks of like this lightish brown and gray and white. So all that, when we take things and we look at them at a close-up level, you get a different transition. And then we have like our human skin. We're like around skin every day, right? So this is another texture, like what happens when you have a young baby, when you have an elderly adult. Our own skin also transforms. So in looking at some examples of simulated texture, this is we'll start off with some ceramic works. So these are three-dimensional works. There might be some sculpture in here, some pottery, textiles, metal work. These are all opportunities for implying, like creating texture and implying texture. So I mean, isn't the movement in this porcelain like awesome? It looks like little like it kind of emulates that fur that we were seeing earlier in the slide. This one's kind of like if you were to take the process of making cake, right? And you know how you do piping for icing? This is like taking that same process of piping and applying that as a ceramic texture. And look what happens with all it looks almost like there's little large chunks of hair, right? Like like someone went to a salon and stylized a ceramic piece. And then we have really detailed, elaborate, hyper-realistic images. This is a Bernini, and this is the Rape of Proserpina. This was post-Renaissance, but right in the Baroque era. So he was 23 years old when he did this. It depicts the abduction of Proserpina, who was seized and taken to the underworld by the god Pluto. So what's really interesting about this work, you see the overall picture, this sort of, there's this dynamic that's happening with the arc. She's trying to escape. He's like, no, you're coming with me. But what's really interesting and what Bernini did, which wasn't well captured in stone before, if you look at the marble, doesn't it look like flesh? Right? When we look at like the details and how it grabs the skin, the detail, even though that hair doesn't look like realistic hair, it has the same flow of hair. Right? So he has these contrasting textures of the fabric, of the hands, the skin, hair, right, and also capturing expression and movement all on the same piece. So this is a section from this scene. So, but if you have tasted food, you must go back again beneath the secret places of the earth, there to dwell a third part of the seasons every year. Yet for the toe parts you shall be with me, and for the other deathless gods. But when the earth shall bloom with the fragrant flowers of spring in every kind, then from that realm of darkness and gloom thou shalt come up once more to be a wonder for the gods of mortal men. So that's why Proserpina is sort of like the identity of spring. So Hades takes her for 3/4 of the year, and then she comes out when it's springtime up into summer. And when fall comes in, that's her going back down to the underworld. So that's sort of this concept of where we have these spring equinox, summer equinox, we have a fall, a harvest season, and then we have a winter equinox, right? So these are all rooted from pagan roots. And then that gets translated. You'll see this happening with, we just, had our spring equinox also coincides with, say, a Christian identity of Easter. Here's another piece by Merritt Oppenheim. Love this piece. So this is essentially a furry cup, right? Like even the spoon has fur and the plate is covered in fur. It came out as sort of like a joke. So the story goes like at the Café de Flore, Picasso commented on Oppenheim's bracelet, and it was a broad round brass cuff wrapped around an ocelot fur that she had designed in the previous year for a Schiaparelli. And Picasso remarked that no one could ever, remarked that if one could cover anything with fur, even this plate and this cup here, Oppenheim replied. And then when she found that her tea was cooling, she jokingly asked the writer for like un peu plus de feuilles, a little more fur to swaddle her cup. And then that's sort of, that's how we come up with ideas. Like, there's many a times when I've been talking with my buddy Matt, we have a conversation, and then it kind of goes into like a fun play with art. And sometimes an idea comes out of that, right? And that's sort of like, creativity happens wherever you are. This next slide, we're going into an implied texture. So this is going back to that fish scale, right? So with the fish scale, you have some examples of actual texture. And then this is a drawing of fish scale, so then it's translated into sort of this like ink and wash drawing. And then designers will take this and abstract it even further. So this is a pattern of fish scales. This is commonly seen in Japanese like kimonos. You might see it there, or woodblock renderings. So it's both fish scales, and there's another one that looks like it that is a water emulation of water. So this is like that simplification process that happens of simplifying something from nature and then emulating that sort of like texture or the concept or pattern. So this is, and we're going back to that drawing of fish scales, and this might look in other ways. So like in looking at two-dimensional works of art and texture, I'm going to show you a few examples of what that can look like. So this is really cool. So yes, it's obviously an illustration of fish. They don't look like they're alive. They look like it might be from a fish market, right, or catch of the day. But they also look kind of very presented, right? It doesn't quite have like the folding or naturalistic portion that was meant to identify the fish in this particular illustration. But that texture of the scale, isn't that awesome? Thinking about Van Gogh, like we always think of Van Gogh and his use of impasto. So impasto is it's a technique where you really make the paint be paint, and it has that texture. So this shows a close-up of what his work would look like, you know, if you're right in front of it. You can see all of that application of the oil paint, and you know, I'm not sure if he was adding like marble dust, but you can do things like add marble dust to your paint, and it'll make it more thick, and that's sort of the concept of the impasto technique. Van Gogh also was very good at emulating texture in pen and ink. So he'd make his own ink pens from reeds, you know, like the things you find by the delta. We live in the delta, right? So you can actually take reeds, cut them, and you can turn that into an ink pen. Same thing like bamboo. Like I have Don and I worked on a video for like how to make your own bamboo pens. And these are things that, like, you know, so we take for granted the materials that are right in front of us, right? So this is an example of some haystacks. And then looking at the details of those haystacks, right, it's just a lot of squiggles and different applications of mark making. You know, he's using one treatment for the hay, a different treatment for the cut hay, and then another treatment for, say, like the figure or the cottage in the back, the farmhouse, and the stone that might be covering that might be working as a fence. Going back to that tiger eye, right? This was sort of inspired by like Tiger's Eye, and this is a 3D artist. This is actually all 3D renderings, and this is called Tiger's Eye Canyon digital art. So it's by Space Frog Designs. I was coming across this piece online, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. It's not, yeah, it is 3D design, right? And this is like 3D 3D as in like Maya, or working with a animation program or a modeling program. But yeah, this is all simulated texture using a computer. And looking at the detail of it, it's like, yeah, it really captures, it almost looks like wood. It kind of looks like that raw stone of the tiger's eye, right? So it has really nice qualities in that, and it's observing nature. And then sometimes we try to replicate that. And what techniques can we incorporate that could give that visualization? This is an example of a Iran. So this is in Italy, and this is Tower to the People. So what I found interesting about this artist is this is all spray paint, right? A lot of this is faux. So if you look at that, the brick, right? You look at the wall. It has that sort of it has like some Greek or Romanesque towers that are on the left and right, framing that fist of flowers. So that giant fist of roses, right? This is the actual piece. This is all actually like flat stucco wall. So even the brick is all simulated. So the brick is non-existent. The that sort of like effect of the Romanesque edges are non-existent. The flowers aren't there, so nothing is sculpted. He's just taking a flat wall and applying texture using the spray paint, maybe some stencils, and I think on here, oh, I didn't have the shot of it, but he's actually holding like a little rose that he used as a model for drawing all the roses. So he actually had a small model on site for reference as he's drawing this large piece. This is what the finished piece looks like. then as we go into another example, this is Trevor Knapp. So he's a printmaker, and these are large lino cut carvings that are then inked and then printed onto paper in a series. And I found these really interesting because A, they're just really cool illustrations, and you can see how it would apply to like pen and ink drawings. And it also has a really nice like textural effect. Part of that effect comes from the nature of working with lino cuts, but I think what I find most interesting is kind of how he's just using the entire canvas and just like activating the space and having this replication and different uses of texture and pattern, right? So you can see as this has a pattern on the floor in this stairwell, and then as it gets deeper and deeper, he changes that to like to create contrast, but also so that it looks different from each other, right? So alternating that pattern creates a textural effect that you don't quite get in like a plain line drawing. So this is like, choosing when to apply line and choosing when to apply like large shapes for contrast, and then choosing different textural applications. Like, isn't that background awesome? Where it has like you can see the shading that's happening. So after the door, that arched doorway, you have these sort of like two little wispy lines on the left side that are taking you to the foreground. But on that back wall, it's got a really bold, dark background, and then it has these crosses that are cut out of it to create more light. So I think that's like, those are little things that I'm looking at that I think, oh, that's really cool. I was using that. Other elements are like carving out really large spaces for this clothing of this woman that's like rushing in towards, I think this is a subway piece, right? Here's another like going through the subway stall, and there's someone hopping in the stall. Never seen that on Bart, never. But I just thought I'd kind of like leave you with like here's like how some artists are taking the concept of texture and playing with that as an illustration, or in their practice whatsoever. So I would like you to just feel free to review. Come check with me with any questions on Thursday, and then I guess we'll go from there. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.